Good morning. There may be a lot of intercom noises going on this morning, but this is lesson 15-3, Properties of Quadrilaterals. Your learning goal, please write this down, is to identify and classify quadrilaterals. Now you just wait, we're going to go to the next slide and it's quite the PowerPoint. Some more learning goals for you today is 1, to classify quadrilaterals, and 2, understand that the sum of the measures of the angles of a quadrilateral is equal to 360 degrees. Simplify that, the 4 angles in a quadrilateral add up to 360 degrees. There's a lot of vocabulary for tonight, so please go ahead and write all these down. Your first word is a quadrilateral, and that's a polygon with 4 sides. A parallelogram is a type of quadrilateral, and with 2 pairs of parallel lines with opposite sides congruent, also known as a quadrilateral with both pairs of opposite sides parallel and equal in length. A rectangle is a parallelogram with 4 right angles. A rhombus is a parallelogram with all sides the same length or all sides congruent. A square is a rectangle with all sides the same length and 4 right angles. A trapezoid is a quadrilateral with only 1 pair of parallel sides. Once you get all those right down, go ahead and push play and go to the next slide. Here's the hierarchy of quadrilaterals. Basically, what I like to tell myself, and it helps me understand it more, is I like to think of an umbrella. It's not the best umbrella top. And then here's the handle. Bear with me. At the top, I like to have quadrilaterals, and this is just kind of how I visualize it in my mind. Sorry, that's not the best writing. And then all of these are quadrilaterals, but on one side we have a trapezoid, and the trapezoid is all by itself. And the reason for that is because it only has 1 pair of parallel lines, versus all the rest of them have 2 pairs of parallel lines with opposite sides congruent. And so on this side then, we're going to have the parallelogram just as it is here. And then from the parallelogram, we're going to have a rectangle, because a rectangle is a parallelogram, but instead of slanted sides, it has 4 right angles. And then the square's in the middle, and the reason for that is because a square is a rectangle, and a square is also a rhombus. So I feel if we put the square in the middle, that helps us understand that. And then a square is a rectangle with all congruent sides. And then a rhombus is a parallelogram with all equal sides. So let's go over that again because that's important. And this tells you the names. So a trapezoid only has 1 pair of parallel lines. So it's a trapezoid, but also a quadrilateral. When we talk about a parallelogram, that would be here. And the definition of a parallelogram is it has 2 pairs of parallel lines with opposite sides congruent. That's why we then have a rectangle, because a rectangle is a parallelogram, but it has 4 right angles. The square is in the middle because a square is a rectangle with all congruent sides, and a square is also a rhombus. And then a rhombus is a parallelogram with all sides congruent as well. Now, if you're listening, and hopefully you are, I want you to understand that a rhombus can never be a square, okay? The reason for that is because a rhombus does not have 4 right angles. And a rectangle can never be a square because a rectangle does not have all congruent sides. So we're going to start with some practice problems, and it says name each quadrilateral. So you need to have A and then write what you think A is, B, C, and D. And once you get all their names down, push play. Okay, so A is a trapezoid, and the reason for it is because it only has 1 pair of parallel lines. So A is a trapezoid. B is a square, and the definition of a square, and I'm going to keep telling you the definitions because I want you to hopefully try to engrave those into your mind. A square is a rectangle with all congruent sides. C is a parallelogram, because the definition of a parallelogram is it has two pairs of parallel lines with opposite sides congruent. So that line and this line are congruent, they're the same. And this line and this line are congruent, they're the same. And then D is a rectangle, and the definition of a rectangle is a parallelogram with 4 right angles. Practice problem number 2. It says, how are a rhombus and a square alike? So when you look at those two things, what makes them the same? What do they both have? So push pause and push play when you're ready. And if you wrote the answer that they both have equal sides, and a good word for equal is congruent, and you'll probably see that. So they both have congruent sides. All 4 sides are the same length. Practice problem number 3. Explain why a square can also be a rectangle, but a rectangle cannot be a square. I mentioned that to you earlier when we were looking at the example page, the hierarchy of quadrilaterals. So if you don't remember, you can go back to that. Go ahead and push pause and push play when you're ready. So a square over here is a rectangle because it's a parallelogram with 4 right angles. And if you remember, the definition of a rectangle is a parallelogram with 4 right angles. And a square fits that. Now the reason why a square is not a rectangle is because a square has all congruent sides. The definition of a square is a rectangle with all congruent sides. A rectangle does not have all congruent sides. So a square can be a rectangle, but a rectangle cannot be a square because it doesn't have all congruent sides. Here's our practice word problem. Our neighborhood swimming pool is in the shape of a quadrilateral. 3 of its angles measure the following: 115 degrees, 100 degrees, 70 degrees. And you need to find the measure of D. What is angle D measure? Remember, all the angles in a quadrilateral, when you add them up, equal 360 degrees. So I would suggest adding 115 plus 100. And when you do that, you would get, where'd my pen go? Oh, I moved on. Oh, okay. So the answer is 75 degrees, but let's go ahead and add. So when you add 115 plus 100, and you can do it over here, you get 215 degrees, plus another 70, you get 285 degrees. Now remember, all the angles in a quadrilateral equal 360 degrees. So 360 minus 285, and that's going to tell you, your answer. I'm not for sure what's going on there, but after you subtract that, you would get 75 degrees. Now, here's your challenge problem for tomorrow. The angles of a quadrilateral measure 80, 100, 180. And so all the angles equal 360 degrees. What type of quadrilateral is this, and how do you know? So if you remember, it looks like it's going in order. So an 80 degrees, if you remember, is an acute angle. It's less than 90 degrees. And 100 is obtuse. So I guess I can't draw that for you. I'll probably tell you the answer. So what type of quadrilateral is this, and how do you know? So here's the angle measures, okay? So it goes acute, obtuse, obtuse, acute. So in your mind, think, here's an acute angle. It's less than 90 degrees. And then an obtuse angle would be more than 90 degrees. So what shape would go acute, obtuse, obtuse, acute. And then B, all the sides of a quadrilateral measure 17 centimeters. The angles measure 60, 120, 60, 120. So now we have acute, obtuse, obtuse. And it's saying what type of quadrilateral is this and how do you know? So go ahead and solve the challenge question for tomorrow and bring it to school completed. And make sure that you have your learning goals wrote down, your vocabulary words wrote down in your journal. Make sure you have all 4 practice problems completed, your challenge problem done, and if so, you have completed 15-3. It was a lot of fun. We will see you tomorrow.